Canada's Conservative government is giving sweeping new powers to this country's spy agency. It's also providing police new tools to track and detain those who would commit terrorist acts. Prime Minister Stephen Harper says the new bill tabled today is necessary to protect Canadians.
A great evil has been descending upon our world, an evil which has been growing more and more powerful, violent jihadism. Motivated by extremist distortions of Islam, its members use calculated, far-reaching violence and the threat of it to achieve their ends.
There are concerns from some people that there are too many powers and there are too many sweeping powers in this, and it might infringe on Canadians' rights. And that question was asked of the Prime Minister at his press conference. Here's how he responded.
There's considerable oversight, but I think the premise of the question itself is wrong. And this is really what we get from our opposition, that every time we talk about security, they suggest that somehow our freedoms are threatened. We do not buy the argument that every time you protect Canadians, you somehow take away their liberties. It is a jihadi terrorist who endanger our security who would take away our freedoms.
Stephen Harper's government introduced new anti-terror legislation today that will, according to Harper, criminalize the promotion of terrorism. Now, something tells me he won't be prosecuting himself or his government for their involvement in the Middle Eastern affairs that actually create the kind of terrorism that we're all now giving up our civil liberties for. You see, at this point in the game, you really don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to call ISIS a creation of the West. Now, whether it was done intentionally or it was some nefarious purpose, or if this is just the incompetence of a bureaucratic military-industrial complex, whatever worldview you hold, it doesn't change the fact that ISIS is a direct result of Western actions in the Middle East. But remember, the exciting thing about all of this right now is we don't need to win elections to have the masses wake up to this. All we need is that critical 10% that sways the popular opinion away from the state and towards liberty. And this is actually one of those issues that can unite smaller factions of different movements into a larger cohesive whole. And that's why it's really important right now to oppose this piece of legislation. Not only is it another issue that we can all agree on, the violation of our privacy and freedom of speech in the name of an existential threat, but it's an issue that targets us as individuals for a problem that's clearly the result of government intervention overseas. Now, Harper wants us to believe that Canadians are being targeted by these terrorists for no other reason than the fact that we're Canadians. He says that they want to harm us because they hate our society and they hate the values that it represents. Right, so they hate all of our freedoms, and so therefore Harper is stomping down and taking away whatever freedoms we have left in order to change the minds of the terrorists, right? I mean, if we're not free and we don't have a society that represents civilized values, well then the terrorists wouldn't have any reason to harm us then, would they? Oh, all that bombing and murdering that we've been doing overseas, just ignore all of that and go back to watching your Netflix. See, the new bill essentially makes everyone a suspect. And given that terrorism is an ambiguous term, the legislation, if passed, is going to open up all kinds of doors to abuse. Now, Harper wants to lower the threshold for proof that's needed to make an arrest and to give CSIS the powers to counter-message or to disrupt what they call radical websites and Twitter accounts. And it allows CSIS to apply to court to order that terrorist propaganda be removed from the internet. And this actually might even be done through secret court proceedings, which is actually also in this bill. Now, if this bill is to be passed, it also gives CSIS the powers to cancel plane tickets and place other travel restrictions on Canadians who are suspected of wanting to join the Islamic State or other extremist groups overseas. Because, you know, it's better to keep them here where they can attack us on our soil, or put them in jail where they can grow more resentful And then we as the taxpayers can just continue to pay for their living expenses. Of course, in all honesty, I really should be careful with what I say in this video. If this bill is passed, it's going to make it a crime to knowingly advocate or promote the commission of terrorist offenses. So am I promoting terrorist offenses right now by blaming Western governments, including Canada, for creating this ISIS threat? Well, if so, I could be sent to jail for up to 5 years. And of course, I better not use the soon-to-be illegal phrase, attack Canada, which could someday come to mean a completely different thing altogether. But remember, of course, all of this is meant to combat radicalization in young people, particularly Muslim youth, after all. According to Harper, jihadi terrorism is one of the most dangerous enemies our world has ever faced. Well, no, it's the social engineers of Western democracies and the military-industrial complex that commits genocide overseas in the name of democracy and then creates these terrorist threats. That's the reason that we have to give up all of our civil liberties. But with documents like the MIAC report coming out from the US, or the massive surveillance going on between the Five Eyes nations, well, you got to wonder, who exactly is the enemy? They say that they're tracking Canadians who have turned to Muslim extremism as a major reason for this legislation. But what about the non-Muslim extremism? Is what we do here at PFT going to be considered extremist views? We certainly are radical. And if things went our way, the corporate state would just cease to exist. So our goals are in direct conflict with theirs. And we aim to expose all of the lies that these wars are based on. So it's not entirely tinfoil hat thinking to believe that whatever tactics are now being used to combat Muslim extremism might soon be applied to us as well. And yes, these kind of knee-jerk reactions to so-called terrorist attacks is how the US got the Patriot Act and the NDAA. And it's how we in Canada are burdened by the Anti-Terrorism Act, as well as other laws and regulations that are aimed at restricting our liberty for a problem that the state itself created. And finally, this bill doesn't understand cause and effect. Not that anything that the government does ever follows a correct line of thinking, but especially in this case where the internet is targeted as the cause of extremism. The idea is that these young people are happy, obedient citizens until they come across an alternative viewpoint online, and then that incentives them to lash out against their perceived enemies. Of course, the truth is, these young people were already at loss. They were already vulnerable to radicalization. And the RCMP has a program in place that, under the criminal code, will arrest leaders of a movement that actively recruit based on calls for violence. So we don't need any new anti-terror legislation. What we need is a significant mass of people to understand cause and effect. The cause of terrorism is the government's actions overseas. The effects are young Canadians sympathizing with the ISIS worldview and then making a commitment to carry out violence. And then, of course, if that doesn't turn out to be the case, well, you can rest assured that the RCMP and CSIS will ensure that through covert operations, using coercion and entrapment, they'll just create the desired reaction that they're hoping to get from this problem that they created. And until we realize that, well, Stephen Harper is just going to continue to trample on whatever remains of our civil liberties while promoting the wars that has now put Canada on the global stage of terrorism. And it's quite clear to me that the real enemy isn't international jihadism, but it is in fact the corporate fascist states of the West. So anyways, let's just hope that I don't get put away for putting out this video today, folks. Anyways, that's all for today. I want to thank you for watching. Please subscribe to us here on YouTube, and also check the links in the description to where you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And you can show your support for the work that we're doing here at Press for Truth by becoming a PFT patron at patreon.com/pressfortruth or by joining our website as a PFT member. And stay tuned, folks. We're going to have a lot more video reports coming very soon to pressfortruth.ca.